So about 10 years ago, I was in a similar situation, and I attended a similar informational session, and then from there, I pivoted my career from being an engineer to then becoming a program manager. And from program management went to TPM to product manager, and now I lead a team of product managers. So, over the next 10-15 minutes, I just want to share my story with you. What I did, what I learned along the way, and how I pivoted, and also hopefully paint a picture of how this course can help you make a similar pivot if you so choose. But really, this is your time, so feel free to interrupt me anytime, ask me questions between the presentation. So, well, this is me, my family. As you can see, I'm a relatively inexperienced dad. My oldest one is 2 years old. My youngest one is 2 weeks old. Thank you. I've been, my wife and I have been married 13 years. Been here in Seattle 15. Came here for my master's, and wanted to go back in 5 years, but 17 years later, I'm still here. On the professional side, I'm a group product manager at Qualtrics today. Qualtrics is right across the street right here, and for those of you who don't know what Qualtrics is, essentially it's the quintessential survey tool. You take a flight on Alaska, you get an email saying how was your experience. That is powered by Qualtrics. But it's not just a survey tool. It's actually a SaaS platform that lets you collect experience data. Right? Think of experience as anything, your subjective experience dealing with a company's product, company's brand. If you work for a company, your experience as an employee with the company. Qualtrics helps you collect all of that data and then analyze it, take actions, and then improve your overall stance, right? So that's what the company does. I manage 2 of our 5 product lines, Research Core and Brand Experience. Been with Qualtrics about a year, but I think it's best if I talk about my experience in terms of this, in terms of the journey that I've taken, right out of school. Hopefully, it kind of gives you a perspective on how you can pivot in your career. I'm sorry, the font size is really small, so if you can't read it, that's okay. I'll speak to it. So my background is in engineering. I did my bachelor's back in India. I did computer engineering, and right out of the school, I got a job in a company called Putney Computer Systems, writing device driver software. First job out of school, so essentially, one of the things that I learned in that job was being a self-starter. My first day at job, and people didn't know where they wanted to place us. So me and my friend, both from the same school, we were sitting in a room, literally doing nothing for a week. And then I walked into the GM's cabin saying, "Dude, you're paying me money. You better put me to good use." So anyways, that's what I learned in my first job. Second job, so from there I moved to the US, did my master's in computer science in Stony Brook, Long Island. And then moved west, came to Seattle to work for a startup called Zeta Systems. So back then, for me, the sexiest thing was to work in operating systems. That was like the coolest thing to work on. And while I was doing my master's, I did my thesis in file systems. So I joined a startup that was in the file systems business. Did that for a year. I was the 8th employee in the company, and I wore multiple hats. I was a developer, I was a technical sales person, I was the customer support, the first line customer support, whatever you call it. I was 22 years old, and the first lesson that I learned in this job was ownership. Right? Doesn't matter how young you are, how old you are. If your name is on a product, you own it. We did a deployment. So I was, like I said, I was the 8th employee. We had 0 people in the QA department, so I was the QA person also. We deployed our product at a customer, Microsoft, and the product crashed, and it took away all the production data that the customer put on it. Well, it was my fault. But At that time, I didn't realize that. I mean, I was like, yeah, the CEO told me to deploy it, and I said, yeah, go for it. And I told him, hey, here are the bugs that we have in the product. Of course, nobody listened. But at the end of the day, that's what ownership means: is you take full control of what your product does out there in the wild. From there, a year later, the startup crashed and burned. But before that happened, I switched to Microsoft, thankfully. And again, building on my passion to work on operating systems, I applied to the Windows security, to the Windows core operating system group, and they gave me a job in the security team. I spent about 3.5 years as an SDET, and for those of you who don't know what an SDET is, it's basically you write code to test code, right? You write. We worked in the operating system, worked on a set of features, and then I wrote software that would test the software that the developers were building. I did that for about 3.5 years, and one thing that I realized very quickly was I was becoming an expert in a very, very, very narrow area of the world, of the product, right? And to some, that was truly fulfilling because they became masters of that universe, and they knew the system more than the developers ever did, and they excelled at it. But I, on the other hand, didn't really enjoy going so far deep into the weeds. What I really enjoyed was actually interacting with my partner teams and interacting with the PMs, and whenever I got an opportunity to interact with my customers. And at that time, I just had this vague idea that, I wanted to move to the business side, and I wanted to be a PM. Thankfully, I was also demonstrating some skills that convinced the PM lead at the time, that I could be a good fit for the same team. So what worked for me was that towards the end of my SDET career, I'd expressed interest in being a PM, and my managers gave me a few projects that helped me exercise some of that muscle. So I got an opportunity to kind of talk about the new features that I'd worked on to a couple of clients. I flew down to London, sat down with I think it was Bank of London, explained to them how they could use this and deploy it at their in their offices and use it for whatever they needed it. Did the same thing, went down to Taiwan, sat down with another customer, and essentially when I came back, I sort of had proven that I could do that job. And the PM at the time switched roles, and a void was created, and then the PM lead just said, hey, why don't you step in, right? So I did that, and then for the next 3.5 years, I was the PM for the application security portfolio within Windows. I worked on two releases of Windows while I was a PM, Windows 7 and Windows 8. And then after we shipped Windows 8, that's when I got the 7-year itch and decided to look for a different opportunity. One of the things that I learned in this experience particularly was, of course, I transitioned from being an engineer to being a PM. I also realized that what I was doing was essentially I was executing on a strategy that was set down by somebody, right? So as a company, Microsoft decided, hey, we needed to invest in application security, and within application security, somebody decided, hey, we needed to do this area, and then my job was to figure out, okay, what do we do in this particular area, right? So I realized that that's what I was doing, but what I was missing was, how does my feature help Microsoft make more money, or how does whatever I'm working on, satisfy my customers, and how does it make their lives easier? It was very difficult for me to make that connection. And at the same time, what I wanted to do is back then I used to think that I wanted to get more control over what I work on, right? That was the motivation. But at the same time, for 7 years, I had worked on a platform that was like a Swiss Army knife, right? You can use Windows for anything. You can use it in construction, you can use it in restaurants, you can use it wherever. And that brings with it a different set of challenges. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to work on a business where I could wrap my head around the entire business, not just the software, not just the technology stack, but essentially how does a decision made by, based on business strategy impact, what I work on as a product manager, and at the same time, what moves the needle, right? What does it take to actually run a business? And so I applied to Amazon, and I got a job as a TPM on the Kindle newsstand team. The team was responsible for the magazine's business at Amazon. It was a triple-digit $1 million business, but the beauty of it was a 25% team. Like, I was going to be a part of a 25% team that ran a triple-digit $1 million business, and my skip level manager was the GM of that business. Like, he called the shots, right? And so I had a few different options, but I actually chose this one because it was a small team, and I was going to get the opportunity to kind of wrap my head around the entire business. So I joined as a TPM, which is Amazon's lingo for program manager, but what I ended up doing was what is now known as technical product manager. And I'll tell you the distinction. Like, typically, Amazon thinks of TPMs as project managers, right? So you have a project, somebody defines what to build, the devs decide how to build it, and then the TPMs come in and just make sure that, things get built in the order and in the right sequence and on the right time and on the right quality, right? That's their job. And so I was hired to do that TPM job, but then they didn't have PM. They only had one PM, and they had like crap ton of, products to build. So I raised my hand and I said, hey, you know what? I can do this. Like, I've written specs in Microsoft. I know what it means. Let me help out. And thankfully, what happened there was the PM, the only PM, he was stretched thin. So he was more than grateful for me to kind of step in and kind of help out. So there, the thing that I worked on was revamping the digital magazine experience for the top titles that you can think of in the magazine world. So like the Wired and Time and People and Bon Appetit and all of those magazines had a super crappy reading experience on the Kindle ecosystem, and basically I helped them beautify and make a really cohesive reading experience for not just for the readers but also for the publishers who would give us the content, right? So as part of this job, I learned a few things. Number one, moving from Microsoft of 2012 to Amazon, the first thing that I learned was the importance of culture, right? As you know, Amazon has a very strong emphasis on culture. They live and breathe by their 14 leadership principles. And for me, just going from that world, where if you stop anyone at Microsoft in 2012 and ask them what's your company strategy, how do you make decisions, you will get 15 different answers. You go to Amazon and you ask the same question to anyone, and they will exactly tell you how they make decisions, right? And for me, that was like super enlightening and super, powerful, because now I could communicate with anyone up and down and across the company, and I had a rubric to kind of speak with them, right? To know how they made decisions. The second thing was the full stack ownership. Like I was in an area that was well contained. I knew, I owned all the way from the purchase experience of how someone buys a digital magazine to what their very first experience is when they flip a page, to the publisher experience when they produce the content and they ingest it into our system and it gets converted into the Kindle file format. So I own the whole thing. So that's another thing that I learned there. The third thing, the third lesson was how business influences product strategy. So the reason why it was important for Amazon to revamp the reading experience was this: we were competing in the market with Apple and with Nook. And with a few other prominent players. And I don't know how many of you have read a magazine on Apple? Okay, so in Apple, what happens is you read it within the context of a software that is written by Adobe, right? They write, they have their own proprietary file format, and in fact, Adobe owns a lot of the content creation market, right? So if you are a creative, you've used Adobe tools, right? Magazine publishers use Adobe tools to produce the final copy that then goes to the printers. They use the same tool to then produce a digital version of it, and they ship it as part of a shell that gets shipped on Amazon, on iOS. Any new feature that they thought of was always released first on iOS and last on Kindle, because Kindle didn't have as much of a market share. And therefore, for us, it was super important to control the end-to-end experience of the customer and offer them the best reading experience. We had to take ownership of that end-to-end. Until then, what was happening is we relied on Adobe to build their apps on Kindle, which had a crappy reading experience. So again, knowing that this was the main business driver for why I was making certain decisions on the product side was super enlightening for me. And the last thing that I learned was a subscription business model, right? So until then, I had worked on Windows, where again, I had no clue about the revenue model and how we made money, whereas here, I knew exactly how money was made. And in this case, the business model was that of a subscription. So I did that for 2 years, and then in typical Amazon fashion, where they actually encourage you to rotate, I wanted to learn about retail, because hey, I was in Amazon. I'd never worked in e-commerce before, and I wanted to understand how that works. I also wanted to understand how the whole supply chain works and how that influences what we do in the software. So my manager in the Kindle team, the GM who ran the business, she became a GM on the retail side, and she was running the pets business. And I maintained that relationship with her, and I often spoke to her about what I wanted to do next. And she had an opportunity on her team where she was looking for a PM with a technical experience. And she just said, hey, why don't you come work for me? I'll make you a product manager even though you don't have an MBA. It's a win-win. So I agreed to go work for her. And while I was there, I got my first taste of how to set a product vision, a multi-year product vision, and then get buy-in from not just your executive leadership, but also kind of excite your engineers and then have them work on it, right? So I was the only product manager on that team, and so I got a pretty clean slate to kind of go and paint a vision. The business at that time needed to launch a new subscription business for pet supplies, and so I went in there and I basically launched a new subscription business, which got shot down at the last minute. So we worked on it for like 9 months, and then when we were ready to flip it on to the general public, the SVP said, oh, it's too risky because we have 2 subscription programs. One is Subscribe and Save, and one is yours, and it's going to lead to a lot of customer confusion. So sorry, we're not doing that. Well, I wanted to ask him, I'm like, why didn't you stop me 9 months ago? But you know what? One thing you learn, one thing I learned in throughout this experience is that everyone is trying to figure things out, even the SVP, right? He was willing to take a risk. He was willing to kind of invest and say, okay, you team, go build this thing. Let's see what happens. And then, we learned along the way, and then, he changed his mind, and it's totally cool. That's how it works. So anyway, but we eventually ended launching the same product, but we wrapped it into the Subscribe and Save business. But now we are, like, pets is, I think, one of the 5th largest businesses within Amazon with a subscription business, which is pretty cool. From there on, I went about defining what else we should do in order to improve the shopping experience for pet owners. And right now, like 3 years after leaving that team, the engineering team is still building on the ideas that I basically put down as like bullet points on the things that we should build on. So the PM that came after me, he basically took that bullet point and like expanded on it and built a feature out of it. One of them was to build a pet profile. Like people love talking about their pets. That was an insight that I got while I was in that role, and I kind of wrote a proposal saying, hey, we should allow people to create profiles for their pets on Amazon. So the PM who came after me, he actually took that, launched the product, and right now we have about more than 2 million profiles on Amazon. So that's kind of an example of what you might end up doing as a PM is like taking like a one-line problem statement and then building on top of it, building a feature out of it. while I was on that team, I also did my MBA from Berkeley, the executive MBA program. It was a lifelong dream to do an MBA, and my manager made it possible for me to carve out time because this one required a lot of travel, so I had to take a lot of time off. But she made it possible for me. So again, one of the learnings here is to have a sponsor, right? The thing that helped me make all of these pivots were a few things, right? One, what Matt was saying is about building on your strengths, right? So when I made the pivot from an SDET to a PM, I built on my domain knowledge of Windows security, and I said, hey, I can do the PM job because I know the job I know the technology. So for me, I'm going to spend a lot of my effort on learning the PM job function, but I'm not going to have to spend as much time in learning the technology itself. Same thing on the Amazon side. I followed one person for a while. Of course, I had to prove myself. I had to demonstrate that I could flex into a different role, but she was willing to kind of take me from a TPM, not having an MBA degree, take that leap of faith of making me a senior product manager, and then letting me run the show. And then the same manager then took over the GM role of a different team, and then she pulled me to that other team to become a lead PM. So my last job at Amazon was I led a team of PMs for search and discovery for home and furniture at Amazon. So if you go on Amazon and if you search for a chair or a couch or whatever, the search experience there is vastly different than if you were to search for a laptop. And the reason is the customer insight that drives investment in that area is that as a furniture shopper, it's a very discovery oriented experience versus a laptop where you know exactly what you want based on the technical specs, right? So my team built out a product roadmap on how we can improve the discovery experience. And in fact, after I left the team, they recently launched something called the Amazon Scout, I believe, which essentially lets you browse through their entire catalog, and as you play around with the UI, it automatically adapts based on what you're liking. So that's pretty cool to see it in action. This is a role where one of the lessons that I learned was it is so important to make the right hiring decisions. I was a brand new manager. I hired a bunch of smart people, but it's super important. It is important to be smart, but it's even more important to kind of find the right fit, both in terms of the job and the person. And that's a lesson that I learned the hard way. This was my first brush with building an ML-based product. So that's what I learned. And here I am today at Qualtrics. So I've been here for a year, and one of the lessons that I learned in this past year was the power of framing and storytelling. And I'll give you an example. So I was hired as the enterprise PM. Qualtrics is a B2B company. We are an enterprise company. What does it mean to be an enterprise PM? I wasn't going to run the entire PM shop there. Basically what the company needed was for someone to come in and figure out how do we go from a homegrown SaaS platform to an enterprise grade SaaS platform. And what does it mean in terms of product? What kind of investments do we need to make? What kind of features do we need to build in order to really claim that we are an enterprise grade company? So I went in there and I basically took that ambiguous job title and then I articulated, okay, here are the areas that we need to invest in. And I basically came up with things, hey, in order to be an enterprise grade company, we need to be really kick-ass at, it should be super simple to set up. It should be, it should give you the right amount of controls to manage it. It should give you visibility into how people are using the product, so let you monitor the thing, and then it should give you the best-in-class security and data privacy, right? From my perspective, it was it sounds logical, but what it did, it actually gave the dev team and even the executive management to kind of start thinking about this space in a more structured manner, right? So now, our roadmap is basically geared towards, excelling in setup, management, monitoring, and security and data privacy, right? So that was, for me, I always knew that storytelling appealed to me, but until I actually did it in practice, I didn't know what impact it could have on a company. This is the first time when I'm actually working with people in sales and marketing directly. Right? This is Qualtrics is a very small company. We have 2,000 people. We have 25 product managers and 800 engineers. So the scale of impact is really high as a product manager. And I'm often in meetings with my sales and marketing people trying to figure out, hey, how should we position this our product? What's our go-to-market strategy? What's our message to our partners? That all of that stuff. And as a GPM, I get to now scale up. And look at a product portfolio, not just like a single product or a single feature area. All right, that's a long-winded introduction. Let me quickly tell you, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
How does the role of opinion change from a B2C company where you're really focused on customers to understand what features you need to add, and moving from there to a B2B company where you have probably the corporates as your customers? Does it sort of change a lot?
It does change in a few different ways. So like the number one, you have access to what I realize is on the B2B side, you talk to 10 customers who are representative of your population. You get enough data points to go and make a decision. The other thing is it is much easier to kind of sit down with these customers and have a one-on-one chat and really understand what they want, because they are more than willing to tell you, because you're trying to solve their problems, right? On the B2C side, sitting down with customers is a luxury, right? You don't often get that. Like you have to commission like a study, and you have to invite people to a focus group, and then you do that. Not to say people you don't have access to that, but it's there the numbers are vast. So even if I speak with like 100 people, there is no guarantee that I'm looking at a representative sample of the people I want to go after, right? So there it becomes a number game, right? So and there are a lot of other things, other tools available to you to kind of help you make decisions on the B2C side. Like on the B2C side, you can do things like A/B testing, right? Like you can do like a quick, you go to usertesting.com, build a bunch of things, and then you can hire a panel, and they'll take this, they'll walk through your product and give you feedback. So there are a lot of tools there. On the B2B side, for me, the most enlightening part is, hey, I can pick up the phone and I can talk to my salesperson saying, hey, I'm looking for customers who fit this profile. Can you help me serve that thing, right? So that's, for me, that's the main difference.
Yeah. A couple of quick questions on the timeline that you've shared over here are pretty incredible. But I also wanted to know, what parameters do you use to determine when it's time to leave a particular role or company? Because Microsoft people are lifers; they stay for a long time. Same with Amazon, I guess. So what made you switch from one to the other, and from Amazon to the next one?
Yeah.
What was the thought process behind it?
Yeah.
If you could repeat the question.
Yeah. So the question is, when do you decide it's time to move? What's the decision-making process? So I'll tell you my perspective. Of course, it's highly subjective, right? For me, in retrospect, what I've done is I've always followed my curiosity, right? I will never claim that I have a passion for one thing. Like I don't have a passion for survey software, right? I never had a passion for building software for pet owners. Like what I had a passion for was I wanted to play a part in defining how customers experience what my company has to offer, right? Like there is an amount of control in there. There's an amount of creativity in there, which I've sought, and that's what I've tried to do. When I shifted from Microsoft to Amazon, my main decision making was I wanted to move away from building a platform and wanted to go into building an app, right? Because an app I could wrap my head around an app. Wrapping my head around a platform, and a platform like Windows is like, I don't think it's one person's job, right? So that was my motivation. When I moved from Kindle onto the Amazon Pets team, I was looking for a couple things. Like I wanted to get official title of product manager, right? Although I was a product manager by all stretch of imagination on the Kindle team, although my title wasn't TPM, right? So when I left the team, the same team offered me, oh, we'll make you a product manager. Oh, we'll give you a couple of heads and we'll make you a TPM lead. And I'm like, no, I want to go into like regulation product management. And that was my decision making criteria. When I moved from pets into the home innovation team on the furniture side, it was basically looking to scale up, right? So I was looking to I was already mentoring people, and I wanted to officially manage people and manage a bigger product portfolio. This was like a very greenfield opportunity. We didn't have anything in this space, so just the lure of kind of trying to define what it is that brought me here. And then when I was on that team, what I saw happen was, two things. One is, I deep dived and we figured out, order from within this chaos, and we said, okay, this is what we need to invest in. But we also realized that we had a lot of headwind in that area, and eventually the business decision was that, hey, you know what, this is not the right time for us to invest in this area. So I had a choice. Like I could either stay in that role, but then maybe scope it down, or I could just look around. And I'm like, hey, you know what? If I'm taking a new role here or there, I might as well just look something else, because I've done this for a while. I've been in retail for like 3.5 years. So for me, the next opportunity that I was looking for was a mid-sized company where it would be a startup, but I wouldn't have to bet my paycheck on it. So it was like a well-funded startup where I could go and play a bigger role. And that's what Qualtrics was. And in fact, luckily for me, it was a pre-IPO company, a unicorn. So I'm like, hey, might as well just give it a shot. Yeah. Just real quick, right? When I was thinking about switching from engineering to PM, the way I articulated it to myself was, hey, I want to move towards the business side, right? But that's pretty vague, right? Like I wasn't going to run sales, or I wasn't going to run marketing. What does it even mean to move towards the business side? And basically what I truly wanted to do was what I said is, have a part to play in how customers experience, my product. And this is a very popular, diagram that was first featured in Mind the Product, where, the way to think about a PM role is something that kind of blends, UX, tech, and business, and it kind of sits in that sweet spot. But the thing is, you're not an expert at UX, you're not an expert at tech, and you are not the only person on the business side, right? And so I actually like this diagram better. I stole it from this site called medium.com, and there's a GM, Brandon Shaw, who's a GM on the platform team, and he wrote an article about the black box of PM, and I really loved this, so which is why I borrowed it here. So the way he articulates PM, and which I agree with, is, when it comes to product development, there are a few different decisions that are going on. What do users want? Why do users want it, right? What is the need? What is the motivation? What are they trying to do, right? That's the job of a PM, right? The job of a PM is to really get into the customer's mind and then represent the customer throughout the product development process, right? When you think of the product development process, there are a few questions that every company asks, right? How does this fit in the world? Like, who are our competitors? What is the size of the opportunity? Should we invest in this or not? Why us? What is the SWOT analysis? Like, why is this company better positioned to kind of serve this need or not, right? How do we talk to customers about it? Like, when we build the product, what's our go-to-market? What's our messaging? How do we want them to perceive our product? That's, oftentimes that's a question that marketing is asking, and, they kind of define the strategy around that. How will it grow? Like, how are we going to distribute it? What's our go-to-market strategy look like? Do we partner with someone? Do we sell it in a box? Do we sell it as an API? That's another question. What do customers interact with? Which is the design, right? What is the front end? What is the back end? What does the end-to-end experience look like? How do you enable it? Which is, how do you implement the product? And then what does it mean for the company? Like what is the strategic importance? What do we need to invest in? Do we need to build more more call centers here? Do we need to hire salespeople in some other team? And the role of a PM is essentially, this guy articulates it really well. It's like, the PM is the API that enables the communication between all of these functions, right? And the way to kind of think about this is PMs champion the customer. If marketing is trying to make up their mind about, how should we go and talk about it, PMs go and represent, the customer and say, hey, here's what the person is trying to do. Here's the end result that they're trying to accomplish. And that helps marketing kind of, adjust their strategy based on what the customer is trying to do. That is not to say that marketing also should not understand the customer, and in fact, oftentimes they do, right? So that's where, PM and marketing kind of tag team together, trying to really understand the customer. PMs partner with design to kind of figure out what the interaction looks like. How does someone experience the product? What does the end-to-end journey look like, right? PMs oftentimes sit down with the engineers and try to design, kind of draw boxes around the product. That's one of my friends had the best articulation for that. The PMs need to be experts in drawing boxes and arrows, right? Essentially, what that means is you take a problem, you break it down into systems, and you say, hey, we need to build something like this. Here is what the interaction should look like. Based on that, engineers take that blueprint and they just design the whole world around it. The other job of a PM is think of a company like Microsoft or Amazon. There are many teams, and each team has their own product development process, right? So when you are doing your product development process, knowing what other teams are working on and how you can leverage them, how you can partner with them, is also a skill that PMs need and they are required to do as part of the job. And lastly, through this course, what we will do is essentially we'll figure out how to figure out things that go in each of these boxes and what role PM plays in each, right? So like, for example, we'll start with the first week by talking about, how do you think about the company? How do you think about the customer? How do you do, assessment of where you should invest in, right? Based on that, the next few weeks we'll talk about how do you, take that insight and then, design a feature around it, right? When you design a feature around it, how do you execute it? What are some of the things that you need to think about? Once you're ready, with that feature, how do you deploy it? How do you test your hypotheses? How do you measure KPIs around it, right? Also, we'll talk about the go-to-market. How do you take it to the customers? How you position it to the customers? So yeah, that's essentially a course in a nutshell.